I still remember the night my neighbor Ethan invited me over for a Halloween weekend sleepover. Our houses were across the street from each other, both sitting quietly under the dim orange glow of the streetlights. It wasn't unusual for us to hang out, but that night had a strange stillness to it, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder for no real reason. His parents were out of town, and he thought it'd be fun to have the place to ourselves. The house felt bigger than usual when I walked in, too quiet, too empty. The faint smell of detergent lingered in the air, and the hum of the fridge was the only sound echoing through the kitchen. Ethan's dad was a cop, and his uniforms usually hung on a rack by the hallway closet. But that night, the rack was empty, and I didn't think much of it at first. I just remember feeling like we weren't really alone, even before anything happened. We set up our sleeping bags in the living room, right by the big window that faced the backyard. The lights from nearby houses flickered through the blinds, stretching across the floor like crooked shadows. Ethan kept joking about how this was our haunted house night, but his laugh sounded a little forced. Around 11 p.m., we turned off the lights and started watching scary videos on his phone. An hour later, we both heard a creak from upstairs. It wasn't loud, just one slow, dragging sound like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. Ethan muted his phone and looked at me, trying to laugh it off. "Probably the heater," he said, though I could tell he didn't believe that. His family's house was old, but I'd never heard the heater sound like footsteps. We tried to ignore it and kept scrolling through videos. A few minutes later, we heard the same sound again, this time closer to the stairs. The hallway light flicked once, then went completely out. Ethan sighed, muttering that the wiring in the house was trash. He went to grab a flashlight from the kitchen drawer while I sat there, trying not to look toward the staircase. Something about that darkness felt watchful. When he came back, the flashlight beam shook in his hand slightly. We laughed about it again, but both of us were quieter now. The air felt heavier, and even the hum of the fridge seemed to fade. Ethan said maybe we should crash early, but neither of us reached for our sleeping bags. I kept glancing at the window where the reflection of the living room lights flickered faintly. It was around 1 a.m. when I noticed movement outside. Not clear, just a shift in the dark, a shape near the fence. I leaned closer to the window, squinting through the thin blinds, and froze. Someone was standing in the backyard, completely still. Ethan followed my gaze, then whispered, "That looks like my dad's jacket." The figure wasn't moving, just facing the house as if watching us breathe. We turned off the flashlight immediately and ducked down behind the couch. Ethan's breathing was sharp and fast, his hand gripping my arm. "It's probably a prank," he whispered, though his voice cracked halfway through. But when I dared to peek again, the figure hadn't moved. It just stood there, head slightly tilted, wearing his dad's clothes like it knew we'd noticed. Neither of us spoke for what felt like minutes. The silence outside was too clean, too deliberate. I thought maybe it was one of his dad's friends messing with us, until I realized the porch light had been on the whole time, and that face outside was completely wrong. It wasn't smiling. It wasn't even looking directly at us. It was just waiting. Ethan whispered that he was going to call his dad. He fumbled with his phone in the dark, but there was no signal. That made no sense. We lived in a busy suburb where reception never dropped. I tried mine too, same thing. Every bar vanished the second I looked out the window again. The figure was gone now, and somehow that felt worse than when it was there. We both stayed crouched behind the couch for a while, listening for any movement. The only sound was the ticking wall clock and Ethan's uneven breathing. "Maybe it was a mannequin," he said finally, though his tone was more hopeful than certain. I didn't answer. I just kept staring at the faint outline of the blinds, waiting for something to shift again. Minutes turned into what felt like an hour. The air grew colder, and the faint hum of the fridge clicked off suddenly. The silence after that was deafening. I thought I heard a soft scrape against the window pane like nails sliding down the glass. Ethan shook his head, mouthing, "Don't look." When the sound stopped, Ethan slowly stood and motioned for me to follow him toward the kitchen. His idea was to check the back door, make sure it was locked. The floor creaked under our socks as we moved, every step feeling way too loud. He twisted the lock once, twice, making sure it was secure. That's when we noticed the doorknob twitch. We both froze instantly. The handle moved again, slow, deliberate, just once, like someone testing it. Ethan took a step back, shaking his head repeatedly. Then, silence. No footsteps outside. Just that heavy, frozen quiet you only notice when something's wrong. I whispered that maybe it was wind. Ethan didn't even answer. He motioned toward the hallway, mouthing that we should go upstairs to grab his dad's flashlight radio. something that didn't rely on service. I didn't want to move, but the longer we stayed, the worse the silence felt. Every step on the stairs echoed too loudly, and I caught myself glancing at every open doorway we passed. When we reached the top, Ethan's room looked different in the dim light. His desk chair was turned toward the window. He swore he'd left it facing the wall. The curtain swayed slightly, even though the window was closed. Maybe the AC, he whispered, but I could tell he didn't believe that either. He grabbed the radio from his dresser and turned it on. Static filled the room for a few seconds before a faint voice came through, distant, distorted, almost like a recording. I couldn't make out words at first, just murmurs. Then, clear as day, it said Ethan's full name. Both of us froze, staring at the small speaker like it might explain itself. Ethan switched it off immediately, his hand trembling. "That's not funny," he muttered, but neither of us had touched any dials. I glanced back toward the window. The chair had turned slightly again. Not much, but enough to notice. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, and the quiet creak from downstairs started again. Ethan switched off the radio and whispered, "Let's just stay up here till morning." His voice was shaky, but there was no real plan behind it. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to run out the front door. The problem was, to reach the front door, we'd have to pass that window, the one where his dad's clothes had been staring back at us. We moved to sit near his bedroom door, trying to listen for any sound downstairs. For a few minutes, everything was still, until a faint click echoed from below, the sound of a door unlocking. I looked at Ethan, his face drained of color. He mouthed, "You locked it, right?" I nodded, but my stomach dropped anyway. The footsteps that followed were slow and deliberate, like whoever it was didn't care if we heard them. They stopped right beneath us, under the living room ceiling. Ethan whispered my name, but I couldn't even breathe to respond. The floorboards creaked once, then twice, and then silence again. We stayed perfectly still for what felt like forever. Then a low tap came from the window behind us, not loud, just enough to make both of us turn our heads in unison. The curtains moved slightly. I told myself it was the wind, but the rhythm of those taps felt intentional. 3 slow knocks, then a pause. 3 more. Ethan stood, whispering that maybe it was a branch. He reached out and peeled the curtain back an inch. I saw his whole expression change. His eyes went wide and his body froze completely. I looked over his shoulder and saw it too. The figure stood right outside the glass again, closer than before, the same jacket, the same stance, but the face wasn't visible anymore. It was covered by the hood this time. Ethan stumbled backward, tripping on his sleeping bag. The curtain fluttered shut, and I swear I saw the figure's hand press against the window from outside, slow, flat, and unnaturally steady. The shape of the fingers lingered in the condensation even after it moved away. I grabbed Ethan and said we needed to get out through the back door. We ran downstairs, flashlight beam shaking wildly against the walls. Every door handle we tried was locked from the inside, even the ones we hadn't touched. Ethan swore under his breath and went for the back door. The moment he touched the lock, someone knocked on the front door, just once, deep, slow, heavy. We both froze. The knock came again, then a voice called softly through the wood. "Ethan?" It sounded like his dad, the same tone, the same calmness, but Ethan's eyes widened. "That's not him," he whispered. "My dad's shift ends at 7. The voice outside called again. "Open up, son." We backed away, flashlight trembling in Ethan's hand. Then we heard it, the sound of boots stepping onto the porch, walking away. We waited until the sound faded completely before moving. When Ethan finally unlocked the back door, the yard was empty. The figure was gone. Only the faint imprint of shoe soles led away from the house toward the fence. We stayed up the rest of the night with every light on, too afraid to sleep. When morning came, Ethan's dad returned from work, asking why the porch light was shattered. We looked at each other, but neither of us answered. Later, I checked my phone. Service was back and there was a single missed call from an unknown number at 1:14 a.m. To this day, Ethan refuses to talk about that night. He moved away a year later and the house has been quiet ever since. But sometimes, when I walk past it on Halloween nights, I swear I see someone standing by the window again, wearing that same uniform jacket, head tilted slightly, waiting. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It was Halloween weekend, and I was spending the night at my friend Ethan's house like we did every year. His place sat near the edge of our quiet suburban street, surrounded by tall oaks that rattled in the wind. The air had that crisp October chill, and the whole neighborhood smelled faintly of smoke and damp leaves. We'd planned to stay up late watching scary movies and eating leftover candy from trick-or-treating. Around 10 p.m., Ethan's parents went upstairs, leaving us in the den with the TV glowing softly against the dark windows. We were halfway through a movie when we heard a soft knock at the front door. Ethan paused the film, frowning. "Who's coming this late?" he muttered. It wasn't unusual for kids to play pranks on Halloween, but the knocking was steady, calm, not playful. We both got up, expecting to see someone in a costume, maybe asking for candy. But when Ethan opened the door, a tall man stood there, bundled in a heavy jacket, his face half hidden in the porch light. He smiled politely, his voice low and familiar. "Hey, Ethan, is your dad home?" Ethan blinked. Yeah, but he's asleep." The man nodded, glancing past us into the house before saying, "Just tell him Mark stopped by to say hi." Ethan shut the door slowly, locking it afterward. He turned to me with a confused look. "That was my dad's friend, Mark. I haven't seen him in years." I asked if it was weird that he came by so late, but Ethan shrugged. "My dad used to talk about him. They worked together a long time ago." The whole thing felt off, though. The man's calmness, his timing, the way he didn't wait for a response. We went back to watching the movie, trying to shake it off, but I kept glancing toward the window. Every so often, the reflection of the TV flickered against the glass, and I swore I saw movement in the dark yard. Around midnight, Ethan finally turned off the TV and tossed me a blanket. "We'll sleep down here," he said. The house was silent except for the wind pushing against the shutters. I woke up a little later to the faint creak of floorboards near the kitchen. I thought maybe Ethan had gotten up, but when I looked over, he was still asleep on the couch. The sound came again. Slow, deliberate steps, moving toward the den. I sat up, heart pounding, staring into the dim hallway. For a few seconds I saw nothing, then a shadow crossed the doorway, tall and still. I froze, unable to speak. The shape lingered, then turned and disappeared toward the kitchen. I finally whispered, "Ethan, wake up." He stirred groggily, rubbing his eyes. "What?" Before I could answer, the sound of the back door creaking open made us both go silent. The cold air slipped into the room like a whisper. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and stood up, his voice shaking. "Who's there?" No one answered. The kitchen light flickered once, then went dark completely. Ethan turned the flashlight toward the doorway, and for a second, I thought I saw a face staring back at us. Pale, still, and almost familiar. Then it was gone, leaving nothing but the hum of the fridge and the faint rustle of leaves outside. Ethan couldn't sleep, and honestly, neither could I. The house had that uneasy silence after something weird happens, like the air itself was listening. Around 1 a.m., I heard him whisper, "Did you lock the back door?" His tone made my stomach tighten. I said yes, but he got up anyway, flashlight in hand. I followed him down the hall, the wooden floor creaking under each careful step. The house looked different in the dark, stretched, distorted, like it didn't belong to the same world as before. We passed the family photos, and that's when I noticed one that made me stop. It was Ethan's dad and Mark, taken years ago, with RIP Mark 2018 scribbled underneath. I froze. "Ethan, your dad's friend, he..." Before I could finish, we both heard it. The soft, steady knock at the back door again. Not loud, not desperate, just patient. Ethan gripped my sleeve, and we stood there, afraid to move or breathe. Ethan whispered, "He can't be alive." My dad told me Mark died years ago. I wanted to believe he was joking, but his face was pale, trembling. We slowly backed away, the knocking growing slower, as if whoever was outside knew we were listening. We hid behind the kitchen island, waiting for it to stop. After a minute, it went silent. Ethan peeked up from behind the counter, flashlight trembling in his hand. "He's gone," he whispered. We crept toward the door again. No shadow, no movement, just the faint reflection of ourselves in the glass. I almost exhaled in relief when something clicked, the doorknob slowly twisting. Ethan's flashlight hit the door handle. It moved an inch, then stopped. We both ran back to the living room, shutting the door behind us and grabbing our phones. No service, just SOS in the corner of the screen. "Your Wi-Fi's down too?" I asked. He nodded, voice cracking. "It went out right after you got here." We tried calling his dad, but every call failed. That's when Ethan remembered. His dad's office had a landline. "It's upstairs," he said. "We'll just call from there and stay till morning." I didn't like the idea of going up those stairs, but staying put felt worse. The house creaked again as if shifting under our weight. As we started climbing, the light from below flickered once, then twice, then completely went out. The only sound left was the faint, rhythmic tapping from downstairs, the same slow knock, but now on the living room window. Ethan whispered my name, but before I could answer, something moved in the dark below us. Ethan grabbed my wrist before I could look back. "Don't," he whispered. His grip was shaking, but his eyes said it all. He saw something I hadn't yet. The tapping had stopped, replaced by slow footsteps moving across the living room carpet. It sounded too heavy to be ours, too deliberate to be the house settling. We stood frozen halfway up the stairs, staring into the dark below. My heart was hammering so loudly it drowned out everything else. Then, faintly, a voice called up to us. "Boys?" It was calm, almost friendly. "You left the door unlocked." It sounded like Mark, the same low voice I'd heard when he'd stopped by earlier. Ethan's lips trembled. "That's him," he mouthed. We both knew it wasn't possible, but the sound of those footsteps coming closer silenced any logic we had left. The beam of the flashlight flickered, landing on the reflection of the living room window. And for half a second, I saw a tall figure standing inside, not outside. Ethan bolted up the stairs and I followed, slamming the office door behind us. We pushed a chair under the handle, though I doubted it would help. The landline sat on the desk like a lifeline. He picked it up, nothing but static. "Try again," I hissed. He did, but through the static came a faint whisper. "You left the door open." We both froze. I snatched the phone, slammed it down, and turned toward the window. That's when I saw movement outside, someone standing by the shed facing the house. The porch light flickered once, and I swear the man's head tilted toward me like he knew exactly where I was watching from. Ethan whispered, "That's where Dad used to keep their old Halloween decorations." We watched as the figure stepped toward the house again, vanishing behind the trees. The silence that followed was unbearable. My mind tried to explain it. A prank, a trick of the light. But every instinct told me this wasn't human. Minutes passed, maybe hours. We stayed there until the first light of morning leaked through the blinds. I must have fallen asleep, because when I opened my eyes, Ethan's mom was in the doorway asking why the office door was barricaded. Ethan just said, "Someone was outside." She frowned and told us no one had been home last night but us. Later that morning, Ethan's dad called from out of town. When Ethan mentioned Mark stopping by, there was a long pause. His dad finally said quietly, "Son, Mark passed away 5 years ago." Ethan's face went blank. I didn't say anything, just stared at the back door, still slightly open. To this day, I don't know what we saw that night, but every Halloween weekend since, Ethan says he hears that same knock. 3 slow taps against the glass right around midnight. It was Halloween weekend, and my best friend Luke was staying over at my house in the suburbs. My parents had gone to a late-night party, leaving us with snacks, movies, and the idea of staying up as late as we wanted. Around midnight, the neighborhood outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you hear every creak in the walls. That's when Luke suggested we tell ghost stories to pass the time. We turned off the TV, lit one of those fake electric candles my mom kept on the shelf, and sat across from each other on the living room floor. The dim orange light flickered just enough to make the shadows move a little. The air felt colder than before, even though the heat was running. Luke grinned and said he'd go first, his voice echoing a bit too loudly in the still room. He told a story about a man who used to hide under people's beds, waiting for them to fall asleep. Halfway through, I started to hear a faint tapping coming from the kitchen. I thought maybe it was the pipes or the fridge. But when Luke stopped talking, the tapping stopped too, like it was listening. When it was my turn, I told him a story about a haunted mirror that repeated whatever you said, but with a delay. Luke laughed, called it weak, and told me to make it creepier. I was about to respond when we both heard something, a quiet voice, whispering from somewhere behind us. It repeated the last line I'd said, almost word for word. We froze. The first thing we both did was look toward the kitchen, thinking maybe the TV turned on again. But the house was silent. Luke tried to laugh it off, saying maybe it was my phone playing a video. My phone was face down beside me. The screen was black. Then the voice came again, softer this time, but closer. It wasn't mocking or playful. It just said the same thing I'd said seconds earlier, like someone was sitting right behind us repeating it in a whisper. The hair on my arms stood up. Luke mouthed, "What was that?" And I didn't have an answer. We turned every light on in the house. The feeling that someone else was there wouldn't go away, no matter how bright it got. I even checked the back door. It was locked, the deadbolt still in place. Luke started laughing nervously, saying we'd probably freaked ourselves out. He grabbed another soda and told me to finish my story. I tried to pick up where I left off, but my throat was dry. The moment I started speaking again, we both heard breathing, soft, slow, steady, coming from somewhere behind the couch. We didn't move. We didn't even blink. That was when I realized the voice we'd heard before wasn't just echoing, it was answering. Luke whispered for me to grab the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I didn't want to move, but the sound of that breathing pushed me to stand. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath with us. Every step I took toward the kitchen floorboards groaned just slightly, and I hated how loud they sounded in the silence. When I finally flicked the flashlight on, the beam cut through the dark toward the couch. Nothing moved. Luke came up behind me, clutching his soda can like a weapon. We both leaned forward, expecting to see something crouched there. But there was only the space where the light ended, empty, cold, and wrong. I swept the light across the room, and that's when we saw it. On the far wall, just behind the TV stand, there was a faint handprint, not a smudge or a mark, an actual print, like someone pressed their palm against the wall recently. The shape was smaller than mine, but it looked fresh. We both backed away slowly, our eyes locked on it. Luke whispered, "Maybe it's old." But we both knew it wasn't there before. I said we should check upstairs to make sure no one broke in. The staircase creaked with every step as we climbed, our shadows stretching along the walls. Halfway up, the light flickered for a second, and in that split instant, I swear I saw someone standing at the top of the stairs. The flashlight flicked off, then back on, and whoever it was gone. Luke cursed under his breath, saying we should just get out and wait in the car. I nodded, but before we could turn around, we both heard it again. That voice, soft and whispery, repeating what Luke had just said. "Wait in the car." The sound came from upstairs this time, echoing faintly from my bedroom. We both froze, staring up the staircase. Luke muttered, "It's messing with us." I didn't say anything, because deep down, I was starting to feel like whatever it was wasn't trying to scare us. It was trying to talk to us. We reached my room and everything looked normal, except for the closet door. It was open, just slightly. I was sure I'd closed it before. The smell of dust and something faintly metallic drifted out. Luke held the flashlight steady while I took a step closer. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the floor. I reached out, slowly pushing the door open. The light swept across hanging clothes, boxes, and shadows. Nothing. But just as I exhaled, we heard a whisper again, this time not repeating words. It was humming, slow and low, like someone trying to mimic a song they didn't remember the tune to. The humming grew louder until it felt like it was inside the room with us. Luke stepped back, his face pale under the flashlight glow. "Close it," he whispered, but my hand wouldn't move. Every instinct told me not to turn my back on that closet. The sound stopped so suddenly it made the silence even worse. We stood there, listening to nothing but our breathing. Then, from behind the hanging clothes, something whispered again. But this time, it wasn't mimicking us. It said, clear as day, "I used to live here." I dropped the flashlight, and it rolled across the floor, its beam landing on a pair of old shoes under the clothes that weren't mine. Luke bolted out of the room, and I wasn't far behind. We ran down the stairs so fast I almost slipped. The living room lights were flickering now, like they couldn't decide whether to stay on or off. From somewhere upstairs, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and pacing back and forth above us. Luke grabbed his phone and tried to call his mom, but the call wouldn't go through. It just played static. Then, in the middle of it, we heard my own voice whisper, "Don't go." He threw the phone onto the couch and started toward the front door, but the handle wouldn't turn. It was like it was jammed from the outside. We ran to the back door, but the same thing happened. I tried the windows, but every one of them was stuck tight. Luke's breathing turned panicked. He said, "It's keeping us here." I told him not to say that, but the moment he did, the voice from upstairs repeated it again, in a tone that sounded almost amused. I told him to grab the keys and head for the garage. It was our last option. As we passed the hallway mirror, I saw movement behind us, a shadow walking in sync, but there was no one there. Luke saw it too. He didn't look back again. We threw the garage door open, and the night air hit us like a shock. We sprinted down the driveway, past the streetlight, and didn't stop until we reached the next block. Luke kept asking what that voice said, but I couldn't answer. The last words it spoke were still playing over and over in my mind. I used to live here. That meant it wasn't just some random presence. It knew this house. The next morning, my parents came home to find the living room lights on and the front door wide open. They thought we were messing around, until my dad noticed something scratched into the inside of the closet door upstairs. 4 words, written in uneven letters. "Welcome back, my room." We never slept at my house again after that night. Luke moved a few months later, and I still live here, though the room stays empty. Sometimes when I pass by it, I swear I hear faint whispering, not repeating, not mocking, just listening, waiting for someone to talk again.